My name is Itzik Reich. I'm the CTO of Dell EMC XtremIO. And in today's quick talk, which is a 30-minute session, I'm going to talk about some of the architecture of XtremIO, some best practices that are relevant for Dell EMC customers. Many of the best practices that I'm going to share with you today are agnostic to whatever product that you're using from Dell EMC. Of course, I'm talking about the storage products. Some of them are unique to XtremIO. So in order to make it understandable, every time I'm saying it's unique to XtremIO, it's unique to XtremIO. And every time I'm not saying that, that's agnostic to pretty much any other storage product that we have. Also, since this is a quick talk, I'm going to try something that I never able to succeed, which is to talk about 30 minutes about XtremIO. Normally this session takes me at least an hour and a half. So if you can see my blog, which is XtremIO.me, it's pretty much cover everything that I'm going to talk about today and then some. So don't really need to take photos in the session. I mean, you're free to do so if you want to, I think, but most of the material is covered in depth in my blog. So with that, let's start. So when we think about the virtualization, and especially when it comes to reality check, virtualization was supposed to give us the ability to provision VMs as we go without any limit. And if you recall, when virtualization started many, many years ago, the pitch was, hey, why don't you consolidate these bare metal servers that don't do too much into larger bare metal servers that's running the ES6 kernel inside of them. And by doing so, you're going to save a lot of bare metal servers. But that was only the interesting part of the pitch. What's really actually happened is that because of the ease of use to deploy a VM from a template or to clone a VM, it's actually ended up with a VMware sprawl. It's so easy today to bring up a VM that you don't need to rack a cable and so on and so forth. So really we just end up with a lot of infrastructure sprawl if you think about it. Moreover, if you think about the VMs, in the old days, they used to be static, right? You used to have a physical server. It didn't move from the rack unless you physically moved it. It normally had a sticker. It was normally part of an Excel file with a specific color that told you where this server belongs to. But then Pat Gelsinger coined the term back in 2013 called the I/O blender. What I/O blender basically means is that the I/O that comes in through the ES6 hypervisor doesn't necessarily comes out in the same way. And the reason for it is because we have so many queues along the way, starting from the switch to the HBA, to the ES6i kernel itself, to the VM kernel, and so on and so forth. So how do you monitor all of these I/O traffic? And if that's not enough, this I/O traffic of the idle state VM is also competing with provisioning cloning of VMs. As you know, this is really Xcopy. So how does Xcopy interfere with the traditional idle state of the I/O in terms of the VM? And if that's not enough, now everything is moving around using either vMotion or in the case of storage vMotion, right? Storage DRS. So everything is dynamically moving around and moving between the pieces. So I'm just going to cover XtremIO really only on that slide pretty much, so you just have the basic understanding if you're not familiar with it. XtremIO is a scale up and out architecture. You start with a single brick and you can go up to 8x bricks in X1 and up to 4x bricks in X2. In X2, we've increased the density in terms of the DE up to 72 drives in the DE. You don't need to fully populate them in day one and so on and so forth. Copy data management is really instantaneous. Things like Xcopy, provisioning operation are instantaneous, so it's really ideal storage for operation that needs a lot of cloning operation. For example, the hands-on labs at VMworld are actually running on XtremIO. Data services, all the data services such as the dedupe, compression, think provision, encryption, all of these are running in real time, all of them in line. There is no concept of a post-process dedupe or compression for XtremIO. The funny thing is that I keep getting requests from different CTOs around the company, can you give us the dedupe engine of XtremIO? And the answer is no, and it's not because I don't want to. Dedupe for XtremIO is not a feature, it's a byproduct of the CAS architecture itself, right? We slice and dice blocks as they're getting into the array itself. And then, of course, we have a very rich ecosystem integration. In this session, we're going to talk about the ecosystem integration into VMware vSphere and other VMware products. So with that, let's start with some specific best practices coming from the architecture itself into the ecosystem. So the first thing is really scaling with consistent outcomes. As I said in XtremIO X2, you start with an X brick. An X brick has two active controllers, storage controllers in the system, and a DAE. You start with 18 drives, and then you grow with them with increments of 6 into the array itself. The reason that you see larger density here today is because very, very soon, we're going to announce the support for 3.68 terabyte drives. It's not out yet, but it's going to be very, very soon. By the way, this session spills a lot of beans, so don't get outside and ask people, hey, he just talks about some stuff that is not out yet. I'm just trying to give you some hints into what's coming. So larger capacity drives, you start with a single X brick, and then you go up to 4 8X bricks on X2 with increments of 6 drives each. And the other thing that is really, really relevant and super important in the context of XtremIO, that if you think about the majority of the all-flash arrays out there, most of them have dual controller architecture with the DAE. And then you can scale, but you can only scale up. You can only scale up the capacity. That doesn't necessarily work well, because what happens if you're running out of physical memory that does and hold all the DNA of the data itself? Well, what's happening in those cases is that you need to destage the data from the memory to the DAE itself. And it doesn't matter if it's a traditional SSD or NVMe or anything of these technologies. At the end of the day, memory is the fastest media in that regard. So if you need to destage a lot of your data, your workload is actually becoming slower. That is, of course, not the case with XtremIO, because with XtremIO, you start with the dual controller architecture, but then you can scale up to 4 8X bricks in the system. That means 8 active controllers in the system, and all of them are sharing the performance and the capacity between all the available nodes. It's not a loosely coupled architecture. It basically means that all of these controllers are connected via an RDMA protocol, Remote Direct Memory Access Protocol, which means that I can get a DNA of the data, the metadata from another controller, even though my host is not specifically connected to that controller. That is really the magic of XtremIO. If you're geeks like me and you enjoy Star Trek, remember the Borg? They all thought like one entity. That's exactly the concept of XtremIO. Big geeks, big fan of Star Wars and Star Trek. Right, let's move on. Operation agility and efficiency. So we mentioned Xcopy, so let's actually do a little bit of a deep dive into Xcopy. Back in 2009, VMware came with a set of API called VAI, or in Hebrew, VAI, or VAI. VAI stands for VMware API for integration. It basically means that I'm offloading a lot of my services from the host to be done directly at the ES6 level, and some of them even done directly at the storage level. One of them is Xcopy, right? Xcopy basically means that if I want to clone a VM or deploy it from a template, as long as that template resides on the storage array that I'm cloning it from, the entity that will do the cloning of that VM will be the storage array. Back in 2009, everybody thought that, oh, it's just going to be quicker, but it didn't really was the case always. In many cases, if you offload the cloning operation from the host to the storage array, it wasn't faster. And it wasn't faster because the storage array was busy as opposed to the host that may or may not be busy. So if you think about it, in a traditional architecture, even if it's an all-flash array architecture, by the way, when you are cloning a VM, the cloning operation just moved to the storage array, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the cloning operation is faster. You're just moving the problem from the host to the storage array. That is, by the way, one of the reasons why back in 2009 and even in 2012, many storage admins disabled Xcopy. Remember those days? They disabled it because it's actually put a lot of burden on the storage array. And you may say, oh, but it's all flash, then it should be faster. Yes and no. All flash array, the media itself is of course faster, but if you need to do a brute force operation of cloning those VM, it's not necessarily faster from the host itself doing the copy. So the magic of XtremIO has nothing to do with the SSDs that are of course part of the D itself. It's actually to do with the memory. As I said before, all the metadata of the data itself reside in our storage controller physical memory. So when we do a cloning operation, really the only thing that we are doing is we create a lot of metadata in the pointers in the system. That is why Xcopy on XtremIO is the fastest operation ever compared to any other all-flash array that is out there, right? It's one of those reasons when you go to the end-zone labs, if you think about the end-zone labs, they keep cloning those VAPs, which is just a logical container of many VMs at the same time. They're looking for the speed of the cloning operation. So for us, it's just creating a lot of metadata pointers in the system that looks to the hypervisor as if a VM was cloned, which it was. But from a storage perspective, we're just creating a lot of pointers in the system, hence the reason why it's so quick. The other primitive that is super important, and again, normally I talk about it just about this primitive for at least half an hour, is the space reclamation. It's a very interesting topic. So, by a raise of hands, who here think that if you delete a VM from vSphere, from vCenter, the capacity that that VM consumes will return back to the array? Who thinks that the answer is yes? Right. Who think the answer is no? All right. And who, well, it's not the UN. Some of you need to take a decision here. So actually you're right, because the answer is yes and no, exactly like you were saying. By default, if we delete a VM from vSphere, the capacity does not return back to the array. This operation is known as unmap. Back in vSphere 5, it was automated. Back then, I was doing a lot of professional services for VMware, and God, I remember that Friday night where we got this email telling us, hey, if you have a customer that's leveraging vSphere 5, they need to disable unmap, right? If you look at the KB back then, the reason was that in some rare cases, it may cause a burden under the storage array, yada, 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 which you know that it's probably more complicated than that. And therefore, since then, the unmap operation can be done using vSphere, but it's a manual operation, and I'm talking about the operation to delete a VM. But then in 2014, my CTO at the time, Robin Wren, and myself walked through the halls of the Venetian Club, the Venetian Hotel at the time, and we met Pat Gelsinger, right, the CEO of VMware. And Robin told Pat, hey Pat, Itzik is here, and he wants to just share some of opinions with you. And I was like, wow, Pat, this is a very important topic because all flash arrays are going to capture the world. Remember, the year was 2014. And if you delete a VM and that capacity that VM consumed does not return back to the all flash array, that's going to be very, very expensive to the customer. And those are your customers, by the way. And if that's not enough, E6 is supposed to be the most advanced hypervisor router, but Hyper-V already supports space reclamation, and E6 doesn't. So I had too much chutzpah, I think, back at the time. I was too young and I didn't know any better. So a week afterwards, I flew to Palo Alto and we had a session with the people that were responsible for VMFS 5 at the time and now VMFS 6. And we loaned them an XtremIO array, right, for the greater good. And that is the reason that now if you are using vSphere 6.5, possibly with update 1, and of course vSphere 6.7, space reclamation at the data store level is automated. If there is one reason that you need to convince your boss to upgrade to vSphere 6.5, update 1, or vSphere 6.7, it's this one, if you're using an all-flash array. Forget about all the other goodies, dedupe compression, blah, blah, blah. Just because of the ability to reclaim a lot of capacity in a much faster operation, that is the reason to upgrade to the latest version of vSphere. What's the differences between 6.5 to 6.7? In 6.5 it was automated, but it ran very, very slow, and deliberately it ran very slow. It took VMware a lot of time and confidence they can enable it in full motion. In vSphere 6.7, you can actually set up the megabyte bandwidth for how aggressive do you want vSphere to run when it's running space reclamation. However, even with vSphere 6.7, you cannot control the frequency of when unmap is going to run. You can only control the aggressiveness, the bandwidth that unmap is going to use to run space reclamation. So what can you do? Well, one of the things that our plugin for vCenter, short for VSI, can do for you is to schedule space reclamation, right? So for example, if you look at the screen here, if I group a lot of data stores into a logical storage folder in vSphere, that means nothing, it's for security purposes, and then right-click it using our VSI plugin, that again, I will talk about it more length in a second, you can actually set a threshold to when run space reclamation. And what it will do, it will run space reclamation on the first data store, complete it, move to the second one, complete it, move to the third, the fourth, and so on and so forth, right? So again, if there is one takeaway that I want you to take from this presentation is this one. That's why I put it at the beginning of the presentation, right? When people still have patience and they can actually see stuff. Got it? Awesome. Next best practice, Egils zero thick. Back in those early days, we used to have a best practice that if you are provisioning your VM, you might want to do it as an Egils zero thick VM, which means that the cloning operation will be faster. That was true before vSphere 6, but many people didn't read the updates from vSphere 6 and so on. So this best practice is not relevant anymore. In fact, I will show you that a couple of years ago, I did a test where The left side of the screen can show you how long it takes to clone a VM where the VM is configured as Egils 0 thick. Then I clone the VM back to a template when it was thin, and then I deploy the VM from the thinly configured VM. And you can see that the latency and the time that it took me to clone that VM was much shorter. And you may say, yeah, Isaac, but it's only one VM. Who cares if it's a couple of seconds here and there? But think about a large provider, like maybe some of you guys. When you need to clone more than one VM at the same time, these latency numbers are accumulating, the time is accumulating. So just clone the VM back to a thinly template and then clone from that thinly provisioned template VM. Make sense? All right, let's move on. So copy data management. Again, copy data management is one of those topics that's super relevant for XtremIO. I'm calling ourselves a large Panasonic storage array, because one of the best use cases for XtremIO is to store your production and dev and test environments on XtremIO because of our unique snapshot capabilities known as XVC. But I'm not going to talk about it. What I'm going to say here is that there is a secret parameter in vCenter, and this is where normally people pull up their phone or iPads. By default, when you clone a VM, like in a VDI pool or whatever script that you are using, vSphere will not clone that VM more than 4 times at one batch. And why was that done? Again, VMware didn't want you to put a lot of burden on your storage array. So you can actually configure that parameter under vCenter and give it whatever number that you want to. Our recommendation, if it's 1x 16, 2x 32, and do the math, which means that if you now have a script or VDI or something like that that clone that VM, so in this example, it will clone it 16 times at the same time, right? So cloning operation will be faster, latency will be faster, and the time to complete this cloning operation, especially in mass cloning environments such as VDI, cloud environments, and so on and so dev test environment, it will be much, much faster. Again, by default, this parameter doesn't even exist in vCenter. It's not just that you need to tweak it, you actually need to create it, which is this parameter. Management, monitoring, and orchestration. So again, the VSI plugin, free plugin, VirtualCenter plugin stands for pretty much that. You download it from support.emc.com, and it can do many, many, many things to your storage infrastructure from vCenter. The obvious one is to create a data store. That's pretty much every vendor under the sun that has a storage array and as a VSI, a vCenter equivalent plugin, they know how to do it. That's not unique, but you can of course do it from XtremIO as well. Some of the unique things are these ones. For example, you can set up best practices on either the ES6 level or the cluster level. For example, the queue depth, many, many other parameters that otherwise you need to read the user guide of the XtremIO manual that can be found in page 183. How many of you actually read the user guide of XtremIO? I rest my case. So instead of trying to remember all of these best practices, just use the VSI plugin. It will enforce all of these best practices for you, again, either at the ES6 level or the ES6 cluster level. The reason, by the way, that we don't enforce all of them and you can actually select which one do you want is if you have an ES6 cluster that is connected to an XtremIO and maybe Unity or VMAX, and maybe some of these best practices are different, this is why you can actually pick and choose the one that you want to enforce. Make sense? Awesome. By the way, it's one of those things that can increase performance to our customer by anywhere from 10 to 30% just by applying best practices at the ES6 level. You've already purchased the ES6, you've already purchased an all-flash array. You might as well use the best practices. Okay, this one I've actually sneaked in just before the presentation. So if you remember, that VSI plugin was for the classic web interface, but we are changing that. So very, very soon, we are going to release VSI 8.0, which is going to be based on HTML5 as opposed to the classic web interface. The classic web interface VSI is still going to exist because customers are not rushing to move to HTML5 just yet, but we want to prepare ourselves from the time where HTML5 will be the only interface that will be available. So it's already is much, much, much faster. The thing that I like the most is the deployment of the VSI plugin. We got many, many complaints that the old deployment model of the VSI, you had to deploy the OVA, then connect to the OVA with a special port, register it from the plugin, register it from vCenter. Nobody wants to do it. So here, you just deploy the OVA, point it to vCenter, and off you go. It's going to be much faster, much easier to deploy. But a side benefit from it is something that has nothing to do with the plugin, but the infrastructure that it relies on, which is going to be known as IAPI. IAPI is one of my passions within the company. The biggest complaint that we get from customers that buying XtremIO, VMAX, Unity, Compellent, and so on and so forth is that, hey, you have so many storage products, each and every one of their interfaces is different. And I'm not talking about the UI, I'm talking about the CLI interfaces. Like a create volume operation on XtremIO will look different on a VMAX that will be looked on different on a Unity. So IAPI is going to unify all of these API to one language that will do the backend translation across the storage portfolio, right? The VSI plugin is just the first manifestation of the product itself, but you're going to see many, many more products being interfaced into IAPI, which will make your life easier no matter which product that you're actually using. And you're going to hear about it a lot very, very soon. So that's the VSI plugin. Next is the ESA, VROps, right? Or whatever it's called these days. vRealize Operation, I think, is still the name. We call it ESA. It's a completely free plugin. It's actually an adapter. You download the adapter from support.emc.com, you upload it to your VROps, and off you go. It actually study your VMware infrastructure in the context of storage, and instead of you setting up thresholds, the beauty of VROps is actually study your infrastructure, so it will actually flag up any anomalies in the system. For example, maybe it's okay that every Friday night between 5 a.m. in the morning to 6 a.m. in the morning, you're running a backup operation, and because of that, your latency is higher. That doesn't necessarily mean a problem in the system, which is the beauty of VROps. It's actually study your infrastructure. So it will study the way that you do also storage operation, and it will flag up those anomalies for you, completely free if you're using VROps. Okay, next, integration with REST API. So XtremIO already has a REST API, which can be used to monitor the array apart from the UI and VROps and so on. But sometime during the conference, you're going to hear an announcement about CloudIQ. How many of you are familiar with CloudIQ? Right, so it's a SaaS-based application that sits in the cloud, which can monitor today only Unity or Unity and Compellent array. We've already made a public announcement that later on this year, it will also support VMAX and XtremIO. So in the context of VMworld, what I want to share with you is this. It will actually show you anomalies at the VM level, right? And again, you don't need to connect to vCenter or ESA. The beauty of it is that you log into your SaaS portal via your iPhone or Android or your browser on your laptop. It will show you all of this information for you. The other benefit of CloudIQ is the fact that you don't need to do anything. You just need to run XtremIO, PowerMax, and Unity and Compellent. We update the CloudIQ portal as a SaaS backend, so every month we're upgrading it with more and more features for you. So as long as you have an ESRS up and running, which basically sends all of this information back to us, we can flag up this information for you where it comes to the health of your storage array and so on and so forth. And again, in the context of VMware, it will also show this information. And stay tuned, you're gonna hear some very interesting announcement later on this week. vCenter Orchestrator, how many of you are using vCenter orchestration or vRealize automation to automate your infrastructure? Okay, not a lot. The only thing I can say you this is that you really, really want to try to start using those products, right? The world is moving toward automation, and so do we. So in the context of XtremIO, we have a free vRealize orchestrator that can be worked either with VRO or with VRA, vRealize automation. The difference between the two, think about VRA as the brain of the operation. It's a self-service catalog, you log into it, you ask it to do stuff and so on. But the entity that actually does the stuff, the hand or the leg, is actually vRealize orchestrator. vRealize orchestrator is free. vRealize automation costs you money. Nothing to do with us, our adapter is free. So what I'm going to show you here is a quick demo about VRO. By the way, you can see the full demo at our exhibition floor. You log in into the VRO. VRO is a UI, but really, in most of the cases, you're going to work with this API. You're not going to work with this UI. So here what you're going to see is that I'm actually going to provision a couple of data stores without touching vCenter, without touching the XtremIO UI or CLI, because I only want to touch one product that does everything for me. The difference between VRO to the VSI plugin, VSI actually requires you to sit on your vCenter, right-click something and create me a volume. This is basically part of a much larger orchestration and automation flow for you, the customer or the partner. So there you go, you can now see it created this volume for me. It will then go ahead and map that volume to that ES6 cluster, format that volume to VMFS 5 or VMFS 6. It can pretty much do everything that you can on XtremIO without touching the XtremIO UI. And again, nothing to do with storage. My takeaway for you guys is basically start to work with VRO because again, everything is moving toward automation. Make sense? Right, let's move on. Protection and availability. Disaster comes in many, many forms, as you know. And in the context of XtremIO, you can protect the data inside of the array using our snapshots, offload the data to data domain. Back in XtremIO 6.1, which we released a month ago, we also introduced native replication. Before I'm talking about native replication, one of the nice features on XtremIO 6.1 is the ability to monitor your host path. So for example, if you have a host that is connected only with one path, it will be flagged up directly within the XMS UI. And of course, vCenter will give you alert on this as well. The other feature is that you can actually use the VSI plugin that will talk up to Appsync, another free product, to backup and restore VMs directly from within vCenter. All of that is not new, it's been there for years. What is new that back in XtremIO 6.1, we've also introduced the VM protection directly from the XMS. So if you're a storage admin, you're not touching vCenter or you're not touching the Appsync UI, you want to backup and restore VMs directly from within the XMS. So completely free feature, you point it to the Appsync server, which is literally next installation, and then you can subscribe to SLA, which means how frequently you want to backup your VMs in the data store, whether you want that backup to be application consistent or cache consistent, and from that moment on, if somebody is running to you, the storage admin, and tells you, oh, I just deleted that VM, no worries, just let me know which VM is it, when was the last RPO that VM was backed up, next, restore, done. Right, so you have an immediate integration between us to Appsync to vCenter interface directly from within the XtremIO UI. Native replication, a very, very unique replication that we have within XtremIO 6.1. Again, we released it months ago. Some best practices. How many of you are using VMware Site Recovery Manager, SRM? Yeah, makes sense. So many best practices are also applicable for SRM, especially when you're using large-scale environments. The best practice that I want to show you this, which is unique, by the way, to XtremIO. It's also unique, I think, across the storage industry where it comes to array-based replication. So think about SRM. SRM automates replication, but if you're using array-based replication, which sends snapshot as its way of shipping data, no matter how many point in time you have at the recovery site, if you're using SRM, you can only fail over to the last point in time, which is not ideal because if you have a virus or a logical data corruption, it doesn't going to do any good for you to fail over to the last point in time with your data corrupted. So what we've done is we wrote a bypass to SRM. If you're using the VSI plugin in XtremIO 6.2, it can actually allow you to specifically point you to the point in time that you want to fail over to or test the test failover. And by doing so, it will trick SRM to think that the point in time that you set is the last point in time, if that makes sense. We're fooling SRM to think that the point in time that we are telling it to is the last one. So that's a good bypass, and it's a very, very highly requested feature that was available in Recover Point, but now it's also available directly if you're using the XtremIO native replication, which doesn't require a Recover Point. So with that, let's do a recap. Scale out is critical, especially as you go large with your infrastructure. In-memory metadata matters. Hypervisor integration for large scale matters. Smart management and monitoring, which is completely free for your XtremIO customers. Recovery and replication, again, native replication is very, very cool. It only sends the unique data over the wire, both deduplicated and compressed. And then the last one I want to talk about is that you don't need to know about all of those things from your heart. As one of my other roles, I'm also running the solution team for XtremIO. So everything that I've showed you before is actually validated within a white paper. So again, xtremio.me, very easy to remember. Just look for white papers and it will show all the white papers that we published recently that talked about those topics. So with that, I think I'm barely on time. I want to thank you very, very much. I know it was a very dense session. If you have any question, feel free to come afterwards and ask me whatever it is. Thank you very much.